Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a great lunch. So now I would like to introduce you to Assistant Dean of Student Affairs, Annabella Morabito, who will lead our panel session number 2. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so energized and I'm very inspired by our morning panel. And frankly, I'm humbled because I'll be sharing the next hour with a fantastic group of people. We will now be starting our second panel. It is entitled Anti-Racism and Good Trouble. And I'm excited to be sharing the screen with a representative group from across our community. I will let them introduce themselves shortly. But I will just go through what we'll be doing in this second panel. After a self-reflective experience in the morning, we have begun to deconstruct our understanding of racism and have examined the ways that we may be complicit. We have explored the question, who is part of my circle of concern? Who is part of my us and who is part of my them? And we have been in conversations in our small groups that have helped us confront unconscious bias, our upbringing, and our conceptions of race. In this panel, we will use self-reflection as a departing point for the necessary work of anti-racism. It is not enough to simply claim that we are not racist. That is a deficit mentality that places us in positions of neutrality and at times violence. Look at the case of Breonna Taylor yesterday. But rather, we need to begin to explore the question of how can I be actively anti-racist? Sister Rosemary Brennan, Professor Kevin Hensey, Alexa Cuellar, and Judson Felix will lead us in a discussion of the ways in which they have practiced anti-racism in their life and in their work. They will share experiences, pivotal moments of their understanding of race and anti-racism work, and their understanding of a very necessary concept, the concept of good trouble. So without further delay, I will now turn to the real reason why we are here, our fantastic panelists. So I would just ask whoever is not speaking in the panel, if you could stop your video and mute yourself. And we will start with our panelists. Whoever would like to go first, please introduce yourself, give us a little bit about your background and your work and its connection to our theme today.
I can start. Good afternoon, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Yes, okay, perfect. My name is Alexa Cuellar. I am a senior at Regis College, a social work major with a minor in Spanish and Latin American studies. And I'm a first generation college student, actually. I'm a daughter of Salvadorian immigrants, born and raised in Chelsea. And I currently work for an immigration right organization. It's called Centro Presente. Centro Presente has actually worked very close with the Center for Ministry and Service. We've connected a lot through events. And the work that I do there, and I guess the work that the organization does is we do a lot of policy work, macro, micro policy work as well, a lot of grassroots leadership work as well. We have youth immigrant fellowships and community organizing. And I guess one of the main points that I want to highlight with the theme for today is that in Centro Presente, we also actively do public education, right? And not only with our white counterparts, or not only with other communities that do not belong in the immigrant community, but as well with our own Latinx community, right? And how can we become anti-racist as well? And what does that mean? Because we have a lot of internalized racism in our community, our youth as well. And so not only internalized, but there's a lot of colorism and other, I guess, terms that we explore within our own community. So that's kind of what we do. And I guess that's the way it connects with the theme for today.
Thank you, Alexa. Anyone feel free to jump in after Alexa. We'll continue with our introduction.
I'll go next. Hi, everyone. So first of all, I have to say it's so great to see everyone's faces, even if it's just pictures or even if it's just names popping up saying that you're admitted. I'm just so grateful to be a part of this. I'm Jitsine Felix. I am currently in my last year of my master's program, the Master's Counseling Psychology program. I was working with the Center for Inclusive Excellence, and just shout out to everybody, Denise and Audrey. I love the work that you all doing. It makes my heart so happy. So currently, I am in an internship at the Home for Little Wanderers, and to kind of connect to the theme, I guess I am I am engaging in good trouble through the, route of an internship and working with an organization and, doing my part to hold the organization accountable to the diversity statement that they have, and also the population that they serve is predominantly minorities. And then also on my own time, kind of working with the Center for Inclusive Excellence, I was able to really self-reflect and educate myself on how, as a person of color, I can educate, those around me, and the idea of that good trouble that we're going to be talking about today. So I'm doing that, self-education, kind of letting everybody around me know what's going on so they know what avenues they can take, and then also kind of taking the route in a professional way in the internship that I'm working in. So different routes. So we'll get to talking about that more. But I'm so happy to see everyone. Mm-hmm. And like sometimes I just want to cry because I miss you all so much.
Wow, there's such great energy from both the previous two speakers. I feel quite honored to be on this panel with you. My name is Sister Rosemary Brennan. I'm a sister of St. Joseph of Boston. And I think when I was reflecting on and just introducing myself, I was going back probably a little bit to reach back historically in my life to figure out where were some of the key moments that really have brought a bit of transformation into my own story. And I have to say that growing up, I was most appreciative of growing up in a family that really modeled and witnessed for me a whole sense of diversity, a sense of acceptance of other people with great dignity. And I think that's what led me actually to enter the Sisters of St. Joseph. I really found that I really wanted to focus my life on being of service. And I felt that the best way I could do that would be through the Sisters of St. Joseph, especially since they had a real strong emphasis on education. And I know for myself that that's just so key for me, to educate myself in order to be able to transform myself, and also to be able to help to maybe have ways of engaging with other people that will hopefully bring about some insight and transformation. I will have to say one of the moments that really was key for me in making me understand how, look at this whole sin of racism has to be addressed and has to be actively moved against was, if you reach way back in your historical memory of Boston in the mid-70s, we entered into this very, very difficult time of when the Boston schools decided they were going to desegregate through busing. And I was teaching in elementary school at that time. And I have to say that that was probably one of the most horrific experiences that I ever had, to see the fear, the anger, the hatred, which just so emerged. And I think for me, that was one of the clearest moments that said to me, this racism is a sin and it has to be worked against. And I think from that point on, there's just been a certain sense of how to best address that. So anyway, I'll leave it at that, and we'll look forward to adding more to the story as we go on.
Thank you, Rosemary. My name is Dr. Kevin Hinsey, and I'm an assistant professor of counseling in the School of Health Sciences, and was very fortunate to have Justine in one of my classes in the past. my work, beyond my work at Regis, I'm a half-time faculty at Regis. I also work in the public sector as a psychologist. And my training and my exposure to good trouble and anti-racism really didn't develop until I went to grad school. And you know, I have found that that for many of my white friends, their recognition of racism or anti-racism isn't something that really is has become conscious for them until they have some type of transformative experience. For mine, it was within the context of my graduate program at Boston College. And what I'm doing now in terms of the connection to the theme is I'm really focusing my efforts on working with other white people in the area of what it means to be an anti-racist. And that's happening in a number of fronts through the work I do in the public sector, but also some consultation that I'm involved with an organization called Jernigan and Associates, where we are actually going into various agencies, and we absolutely work with multiracial and multicultural groups, but also have a strong focus in our work in helping white people help white people with this recognition that and this might be something we talk further about today, but there's a recognition that while Black, Indigenous people of color have lived experience with racism and surely offer a window into that experience that I will never have as a white man, that it's not the responsibility of Black, Indigenous people of color to change white folks, if anything, or to help with education. Though they certainly do. I have many colleagues of color who do that work. So I find that that's part of my own path as a white anti-racist is working with other white folks on these issues. I do it mostly through consulting and also in my teaching at Regis. So it's really a joy to be a part of this panel. I'm looking forward to further discussion.
Well, thank you, everyone. And I'm just really glad to be sharing this space with all of you, because I think I know all of you personally to some degree, especially our two students. And I know how much you bring to the conversation and how much your life is dedicated to this work. So we know it's coming from a place of lived experience and a genuine place. So I'm going to actually ask Audrey to share screen to start our panel off with a clip from Ibram Kendi, who in recent months has just really become known for his work on anti-racism, although he's been doing it for years. And so we're gonna examine this understanding of the difference between not being a racist and being anti-racist, and then we'll depart with our first question following the video.
You know, your book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, has become a bestseller in light of what's been happening, and you've been speaking a bit to, you know, the ways in which anti-racism and racism are the only two polar opposite ways to hold a view on racism. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about what the basic tenets of anti-racism are for people who aren't as familiar with it in terms of how they can be anti-racist.
Sure. And so I mentioned in my talk that the heartbeat of racism is denial, and really the heartbeat of anti-racism is confession, is the recognition that to grow up in this society is to literally, at some point in our lives, probably internalize ideas that are racist, ideas that suggest certain racial groups are better or worse than others. And because we believe in racial hierarchy, because Americans have been systematically taught that Black people are more dangerous, that Black people are more criminal-like, when we live in a society where Black people are 40% of the national incarcerated population, that's going to seem normal to people. When we live in a society, in a city like Minneapolis, where Black people are 20% of the population, but more than 60% of the people being subjected to police shootings, it's going to seem normal. And so to be anti-racist is to believe that there's nothing wrong or inferior about Black people or any other racial group. There's nothing dangerous about Black people or any other racial group. And so when we see these racial disparities all around us, we see them as abnormal. And then we start to figure out, okay, what policies are behind so many Black people being killed by police? What policies are behind so many Latinx people being disproportionately infected with COVID? How can I be a part of the struggle to upend those policies and replace them with more anti-racist policies?
So Ibram does a really good job, placing this in a space of where we are in our reality with our policies. And so as you approach this theme that I think has become rather mainstream in the last couple of months with all the violence we've seen against Black people, my question to you is when did you first understand the difference between not being racist and being an anti-racist? And how has that difference impacted your life and the work that you do towards justice? And anyone feel free to jump in and we'll go from there.
I'm happy to make a few comments initially. This recognition of not being racist and being an anti-racist for me was something, again, that was cultivated during my graduate education. I think more particularly it was cultivated in relationship with professors and fellow students of color, to which I am, forever indebted. What I mean by that is that I initially, I can look back on my own white racial identity development and acknowledge that it took much patience on the part of my professors and friends of color to be able to stick with me through my developmental process of moving from, well, I'm not racist, right? I'm not calling someone a racial slur. I believe everyone has a right to live a happy life, and moving from maybe even a colorblind orientation, which is unhelpful, and moving more into a recognition that as a white man, just by virtue of being born into this body and being, raised in a predominantly white environment where I did not have any sort of meaningful connections with people of color until graduate school. That's true. I was raised in southern Indiana and did not have meaningful relationships with people of color until I was 22. And because of that, I have internalized dominance. I think my way is the right way. And, the right way is the white way. And it's just part of what it means to be socialized as a white man. And what does it mean to be anti-racist? I think, Kendi's really onto something when he acknowledges that anti-racism for white folks is about confession. And let me tell you, I didn't like to confess because no one likes to feel like they're a sinner, particularly when they did not even have recognition of sinning, right? And so there was a lot of consciousness raising that occurred and still is occurring. And I think this second part of the question, how has that difference impacted the way I approach the work towards justice? I have grown to appreciate over the years that developing and, more importantly, sustaining an anti-racist orientation or consciousness requires ongoing work. There is a way that dominant white supremacist socialization, I hate to be so blunt, I like to call it a warm blanket. It's a warm blanket, a hot cup of cocoa, and the book you know so well. You can fall right back into that type of mindset and heart set over time, if not in connection with people that can help you stay accountable. So I can share more about that at some point, but those are my initial thoughts.
Thank you so much, Kevin. You know, I'm looking at the activity in the chat because people are reacting, and I think that there's a lot that you shared that is so familiar, just especially and not just to white people, but also to fair-skinned Latino people. I can see Alexa nodding along because we've been in environments where we can be accessories to that mentality and to that dominance as well. So I really appreciate you sharing that. Any other thoughts or reactions about your understanding of not being racist versus being anti-racist, and how do you enter that conversation that can be so difficult for a lot of us?
So first of all, I appreciate Dr. Hensey's words and his honesty about his own experience. I didn't understand the concept or didn't even know there was a word that reflected this concept of being anti-racist. Even as a woman of color, I was growing up in the sense of either you're racist, you don't know you're racist, or you know you're not racist. I felt like growing up, those were the only two terms that I was exposed to and that I was fully aware of. It wasn't until, I would say, I think my first year of my master's program that I learned this idea and concept of anti-racism and what that actually truly means. And I learned it at the hands of and the voice of a white person. And for me, it was a little, I had to like check myself and check my biases and my unconscious bias before to actually really see what she was trying to say. And one thing that she mentioned, which Dr. Hensey spoke about a little bit, was she mentioned that what she realized was that this anti-racism work that she was doing, she had to connect with other white people, because for her at first, it was hard for her to have a person of color kind of tell her or educate her on their experiences when she knew, okay, like this is probably a lot for you as a person of color. This is probably a lot of energy that you're putting in sharing your experience again to another person of whiteness. Energy into, you know, diving into like yourself as a person of color to kind of let me educate and tell my friend of whiteness, you know, what it means to be racist. And so she found out that she had to sit amongst other white people so they could feel, I don't want to use the word comfortable, but like that's the only word that can come up right now, is somewhat, you know, okay with doing that confession part without having to feel guilty while if a person of color was in the room with them. And so for me, when I heard that and like I listened to some of the reactions of people of whiteness, I think for me, that's when I realized that there is another layer that needs to happen within yourself to start this road or journey of anti-racism or being anti-racist. And it goes back to, you know, when we think about sin, we don't necessarily always think about sin, the start of sin as a thought. We always think about, oh, like sin is an action. If you so think about stealing, if you steal, then yeah, you're definitely sinning. But if you think about stealing, it's not really a sin because you just thought about it, you didn't do the action. But racism, the sin does start in your thoughts. The sin does start within your unconscious bias. It starts with your bias that you're probably definitely aware of, but you never allow yourself the chance to confront those biases, confront that, feeling of dominance that you, as a person of whiteness, that you have, but you're not really quite comfortable confronting it. And so for me, I think I had to start really being okay as a person of color with challenging my friends of whiteness in a level of where it is coming from a caring place, but also not having the guilt when I might strike a chord for them as a person of color. Because I think, especially growing up, I was like, oh, I don't want to step on anybody's toes. But now it's like, move your toes if that's the case. But I think overall, I just had to come to a place where, to get to this level of justice, to push forth this work of justice, I have to be willing to, also be uncomfortable at times. Denise always says that, lean into that discomfort, and I really had to. And I think I kind of took that on in order for myself to see the justice start to unfold in the smallest ways, and then also, start to see it unfold in a bigger way.
I definitely, oh, Alexa, please.
Oh, okay. Thank you for everybody who's been sharing. I think we can all agree, right, and a lot of the points that you guys made. And for me, I guess understanding the difference between not being racist and anti-racist, right? Conceptualizing that was something that I guess did take me until, I started actually doing the work. Actually, I guess even having the privilege to go to college and having some classes, right, to understand that. Because that type of language, I guess the scholarly language or conceptualizing those terms and everything, I didn't grow up around that, right? And I think also that word of recognizing and being conscious of your own biases, of what you've been saying, or your community, or where you grew up, like I guess things that we tend to normalize and say, oh no, it's just a joke, or oh no, that's and it does have I guess like a race kind of like a racist tone to it, right? So I guess for me, that's when I actually started actively doing the work, when I started to get involved with an organization like Centro Presente, where I was giving the space, I guess, to really understand, I guess, in more, like I said, more scholarly language, or conceptualizing the terms of what that actually means. And then from there, that's when I started to really question in my own household, in my own community, in the Latinx community, right? As a white passing Latina, how do I again also have benefits of as a white passing person, right? And what are my own, how do I play along to that unconsciously, right? And then now that I'm conscious about it, what can I do actively to, use that platform, to say something and do something. So, and one thing definitely for me is that now how it has impacted me, who I am as a person, and the work that I want to do, is that I'm getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? Always questioning myself, understanding that I need to be uncomfortable to learn. I need to, broaden my bubble, or pop that bubble, actually, right? And understand that that's not where I need to be if I actually want to, do this work and continue to develop myself, and not only myself, but I guess, do the work for my, and be, I guess, in solidarity with my, sorry, lost train of thought. Wow, I went completely blank. But I guess to just be uncomfortable, right? To be uncomfortable, get comfortable with the idea of being uncomfortable. I think I learned that too at Regis as well, with the service trips that I've had the honor to participate in through Center for Ministry and Service, to learn about other social justice issues. And as a student, as a college student, what can I do and what platforms can I also advocate and talk about these issues that are important, and to actively do something to be anti-racist, not just not being racist, right? So thank you.
So we are getting some questions from the chat box, actually, and I think one of them is really relevant to today and to what Regis is trying to do. And I think all of you have alluded to it in some way. So I'm just going to ask one of you to chime in, and then we'll move on to our next portion. But conversations as part of the transformative process. And I know all of you talked about education as well. So can you speak to uncomfortable conversations as part of the transformative process and education as well?
So I can definitely, and I'm jumping to answer this question as being part of, leaning into that discomfort. I can speak to a handful of conversations that I've had that not made me uncomfortable at the start because I was challenging my internalized oppression. And then also the idea of, I was a student at Regis, I'm a student of color at Regis, I am a woman of color at Regis. I felt as though I had no place to kind of bring up certain conversations to certain people. And part of that was I was confronting something that I've never confronted before. And I did not know how the other person was going to react or take what I was going to say. And that was one of my fears. And I think sometimes with these uncomfortable conversations, you will never be able to kind of, you will never be able to predict how the person's going to react or take what you're saying or respond in the conversation itself. I think a few moments, like I found myself in the Center for Inclusive Excellence, having these conversations with, people that we see as high authority in a college institution, in an institution in general. And so for me, being in a spot where I can, or like in my mind, I can, quote unquote, educate through my experience, but however, what started to like combat or make that, how do I say this? Kind of, I'm doing this because tension, yes, make that tension was because of the positionality of that person versus me. And so just to speak to like the education around it and like how to kind of continue with that conversation, I think I had to realize that regardless of what comes out of this conversation, I spoke my piece, if that makes sense. At times, I think and I'm speaking from a person of color's point of view, at times that we find ourselves in situations where we are open to educating or having those uncomfortable conversations with people of whiteness. However, we tend to feed into that internalized oppression in the sense of guilt, that, I don't want them to feel guilty about what they're doing. I don't want them to feel guilty about what they said possibly. So let me not even bring it up, and I think that's something that people of color probably we don't even know we do inside. And it could definitely hinder us from using this moment of, yes, it's uncomfortable to say this, but chances are you might not even hear this you might never hear this from another person of color. Just an example, just the other day, I was in my internship class and we were doing a role play, and it was a person of whiteness and a student of color doing a role play. And there were some things that came up for me, and I was very hesitant about speaking on, what feelings came up because they were all connected to my race identity. And I ended up speaking, and I was fearful of how the person was going to take it. And in that moment, I think what kind of pushed me to share was because if I don't say this right here, right now, in this conversation, chances are they will never have an opportunity to witness and hear this. And I think for me, that's what I've been able to kind of have these uncomfortable conversations, kind of taking that risk to have them, because you cannot predict if this person's going to have this kind of conversation or this gem of a moment ever again in their education towards, you know, anti-racism, hopefully. I know I said a lot in that whole thing. I hope everybody understood what I was trying to say.
Jadisha, I want to follow you up and say thank you. Thank you very much, because I just want to say that I just want to know that I want you to raise questions for me, for us as Sisters of St. Joseph, to make us feel guilty in a certain sense, to help us to think differently. I think, you know, at times we're so aware that, you know, we just kind of can numbly be involved in what this culture is. And I know it's a risk for people to do that, but I think we all, every one of us, has to be open and recognize, you know, no, I want to have people raise those questions with me. I want to be challenged. I want to think differently. And I want to say that I will so respect you for doing that. I think I look at it as Sisters of St. Joseph that, you know, I can look at individually, but I can also recognize that as women religious, we do have power in ways sometimes that others don't have power. And I think one of the ways that has helped my own transformation is living in community with other women who have risked to challenge me and who have risked, you know, to point out some things that just are not helpful or meaningful and have showed my biases. And then I will also have to say my broader experience with our wonderful women religious of color around the world. They have challenged some of us up the yin yang in the best sense. And so I just say that's, we have to, and I know it's a risk and I know it can be painful, but I do say that that's so what's needed in this time, because you're right. We don't want to lose the moment. We don't want to lose, oh, wait a minute. Okay, I might be feeling uncomfortable. It might feel like I want to hit to my denial point, but I want truth, and truth is the only thing that's going to transform. So thank you for that.
Can I share? So I think if I think of it in a student perspective, right? As a student, like what can I do, right? How can I, what does anti-education look like? Or for me as a student, I know sometimes I was actually involved in some student organizations at Regis. And I remember there was always that question. It's like, oh, but what can we do, right? What can we do? Like, oh, I don't really understand so many of those concepts. So I feel like I don't have the language to really explain this to my, you know, to, let's say, my white counterparts, or how do I explain this, or what do I do? I'm kind of nervous, I don't know. And I think sometimes we get so caught up with the idea of making big change, right? Like eventually that's what we hope to do. But I think sometimes understanding that just by one small change, with small changes, you create a big social change, right? So I think that was something that I began to learn, because I think when I first started to really feel, let's say, that fire, or, you know, how we say now you're woke, or you understand, or you're really understanding what it means to be anti-racist, you're so motivated to do so much, which is amazing, that you get so caught up in the big picture that, you know, you forget the little actions, which really, really make a huge difference. So I would say to start out small. To me, when I think of anti-racist education, start out small with your friend group. At home, it's really important, your own community. I would like to share too, this summer I worked with immigrant youth. We taught a class, it was like a leadership class, and we spoke about, it was a lot of Central American immigrants who recently, I guess, were arrived to the United States about a year ago, most of them. A lot of them fleeing from extreme violence in Central America, El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala. A lot of them fleeing from extreme poverty, gang violence. And so understanding their story, their internalized racism, right? And I guess they felt comfortable. It was amazing to see in that space, 15-year-olds, 14-year-olds kind of accepting like, oh, you know what? I never realized that that's actually a racist comment that I said about myself, about my own community, and about others as well, right? And so, and to me, a class like that is extremely important, because these are young folks who come to the United States and don't have the opportunities or a space like that, a space, and not only that, where they can actually feel comfortable, you know, to kind of, again, be uncomfortable and recognize themselves like, you know, this is something that is not right. I didn't even realize it because my own community has internalized that. And what can we do, you know? So I think just starting out small, you know, planting your little seed, and then you'll start to see that little by little it begins to flourish. And I think, again, like we've all kind of said and agreed, that this anti-racist education is not just short-term, it's a long-term process. And throughout that, there's little small changes that we can all do. There's those small actions that we can all do. And there's many opportunities where we can question ourselves, question you know, other communities, other people. And it's a lifetime thing. And I'm always learning, and Abuela's always learning, Jitsine we're always learning all the time. So I think that's the beauty of it. So I think my main takeaway here is sometimes to not get, I guess, blinded by the big, right, wanting to do the big, huge change, right? Because it starts out small. And we have so many leaders that we can look back on, historical leaders that started out small as well. So, and then, you know, look at the big change that they have now. So I guess that's the takeaway that I just kind of want to say.
And I want to, I know we're sort of moving, and let me know if I freeze, because I'm getting all these notices that my internet is unstable. Did I freeze? No.
No, you're good.
I want to start transitioning to our second portion, because I think you have started alluding to it, this idea of good trouble that Congressman John Lewis left with us in really in his legacy towards our country. So we're going to share a clip, an interview with him, and that was fairly recent, and I think it's a gem, and it's with Trevor Noah, so it's kind of funny. So we'll watch that, and I'll ask the question about good trouble. But I think, Alexa, to your point, and what so many have shared, for sharing that. I think that, I mean, he said it so clearly, and we are in an important year, not only presidential elections. I think people focus too much on presidential elections, but local elections. Civic engagement is ongoing, and good trouble is ongoing, and deconstructing racism is ongoing. So I want to hear a little bit from any of you, from all of you, really. How do you engage in good trouble? And what is your understanding of your civic engagement, and how you engage in a fight for a better world, guided by values? And you know what, I think I'm going to start with Sister Rosemary Brennan, because I know she has a lot to offer, and I would love to hear from the sister's perspective to ground us in the conversation.
Oh, wait a minute, I have to unmute. Thank you, thanks. I had to say, when I would hear John Lewis say, good trouble, I just could resonate in my bones. I loved that. It just feels like, oh, part of my soul, part of who I want to be, who I am, and who I hope we are as Sisters of St. Joseph. I think that the good trouble is always trying to make sure you're going to step up, be there. Much like John Lewis said, you know, the ability to put your body where it's needed at the time, and to make sure that you're doing it with others who are giving you a broader understanding as to kind of where we should stand up. I know Sister Mary shared a story this morning, which, if it's okay, I was going to share it again. It's on that fateful day in Selma, when you know, John Lewis was coming across that bridge. I know we are so proud to stand on the shoulders of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Rochester, New York, who were the only ones that accepted John Lewis and all of those who were injured that day into their hospital to take care of them. So I think for me, that's kind of an example of what it means to be about good trouble, having the courage to make sometimes decisions that are going to put you at odds, make you take a risk. You're going to have to say, I really don't care what people think about me. I'm going to do the right thing in the right moment, and will be willing to kind of take the consequences for that. And I think I also equate it very much with what Pope Francis calls us to always be living on the margins. I think that that's also where we really likewise are very much connected to the good trouble that our world needs to have addressed at this time. I know John Lewis also speaks to the fact if you see something, say something or do something. Probably much like John Lewis, I know that we have had a bail fund for a number of our sisters who likewise have been arrested along the way in a few different incidences. So that's probably not always something that people know or appreciate. I'm not quite sure that it's totally a budget item, but we have had to have that money available over the years as we've had sisters involved in many. So I just think in this point in time, I find myself, though, in the midst of this movement, very much wanting to be led by others, too. I don't want to make a presumption that I know what's the right good thing that I should be moving about. I want to be in dialogue. I want to be in collaboration. I want to be led by this younger generation and the people who really are passionate about it. You know, I don't mind being a follower. I don't have to be a leader, but I do want to be involved.
Rosemary, I want to just thank you for everything you just shared. And I would just add very briefly that, you know, good trouble for me is also about recognizing one's power and how to use it. And what I've observed for me is that I've named this with colleagues of color. I'm able to say things as a white man and get away with it, and I'm not written off as the sensitive, you know, person of color or the person who always brings it up. And I will say that I think white people who care about anti-racism actually have more power than they think they have. There is a way that the sort of cultural expectations within different systems create a culture of silence around racism and a sort of a culture of protection around the feelings of other white people, because the worst thing we'd ever want to do is to have a white person, a colleague, a friend, feel shame or guilt or get angry, because those emotions are impermissible.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we need to get over that and need to be willing to sit with emotion, to move beyond the intellect, to be able to embrace emotions. I think white anti-racism, the risk with this is it becomes an intellectual exercise among white people, and I would add it, call it out, particularly in academia. We have to move beyond an intellectualized discussion and move into sitting with feelings. And this is something that I think white people need to do with white people. If, you know, people of color surely can be involved and can have and should have leadership positions. And what I've heard from so many of my friends of color is, I don't want to be a part of that group. That's traumatizing to sit there and hear these inner discussions in development. And so good trouble, I think, fundamentally, again, it's about recognizing one's personal power. And I would add, because we are a Catholic institution founded, you know, on the values of the Sister St. Joseph, the degree to which you have faith, recognizing that you also have that as a source of power.
Mm-hmm.
This is not exclusively about how comfortable do I feel in the moment. How much faith do you have that there is a power with no ending that you are able to tap into that will see you through your darkest time?
That's so powerful. Thank you both. Really inspired listening to you and Sister Rosemary, as you shared about wanting to follow. I couldn't help but think of Justine and Alexa, who have done so much good work themselves. And I know, Justine, I hope you share a little bit about your civil rights pilgrimage, because you were on that bridge. And so Sister Rosemary's talking about John Lewis being admitted to a CSJ hospital, and you were there 50 years later on the anniversary of Bloody Sunday. So we'd love to hear that as well.
Of course. I'm trying to figure out where to start, but I think so. Growing up and like being in school, I think we did learn about, you know, the civil rights movement, but I definitely do acknowledge that it was a very briefed version of the civil rights movement. And I think for me personally, going on the civil rights pilgrimage with Regis and, you know, taking some students along with that pilgrimage, I think it was a moment for us to physically connect with history. And I think that was one thing that I was, you know, reiterating with the students, but also reiterating with myself as I was on that trip, that we are going down south. We are going to places that, you know, was the epicenter of, you know, the civil rights movement during that time. And for us being on that bridge, it was there, once we touched the bridge, like nobody could talk, nobody could speak. We were at a loss of words. I personally was very emotional, but like did not know what emotions were coming up, couldn't connect to what emotions. But I think for all of us, it was a moment for us to physically connect the movement that is happening now directly to the movement that happened, you know, 50 years ago. And I know that Trevor Noah said, oh, it's a different movement that's going on right now. For me personally, being there, I felt as though it was the same movement, the same blueprint that we're using, the same movement. But however, as a younger generation, as the generation coming up, we're obviously going to have this movement kind of encapsulate in a different way, where we have different tools, we have different avenues that we can take, and we're going to use those. But I think at the core, and that's what I realized being on that trip, that pilgrimage, is at the core of this movement, at the core of, you know, our generation. It's the same thing that 50 years ago, you know, John Lewis, Dr. Martin Luther King, the Sisters of St. Joseph were trying to do too. And I think for a student, you know, kind of being in that moment, I realized that, you know, when I do hear this phrase, good trouble, it's not necessarily just, you know, let me, you know, do some ruckus and call it a day. Let me like call someone out for what they're doing. Let me, you know, make someone angry. But it's, you know, that preparation side, you know, what do I see? And I think for me, that's what it starts with. Like, what do I see that's wrong? You know, okay, I see this is wrong. Okay, cool. What is the solution, or some solutions that I can think of? How do I prepare myself, you know, first? And I think that's something that I also have to do. How do I prepare myself first to deal with the solution, to acknowledge the solution, to speak about the solution that I might have, but also accept that my solution might not be the correct solution for the problem that I see. And I think for me, that's the idea of good trouble, knowing that, okay, like as a generation, we see issues, we see multiple issues. And, you know, it's kind of up to us individually to figure out, okay, like how do I prepare myself in the correct way? How do I respond in the correct way? But also, how do I live with the consequence that's going to happen, right? How do I, okay, if I do get arrested, or if this happens, if I see this, what do I do? How do I live with that? And I think just as a student and being on that trip, and then also meeting living legends, as they call them, we had the chance during this trip to also sit with Dr. Martin Luther King's barber. Like that was something that was so crazy for us, because in the Black community, we know how powerful and how important the barbershop was during that time. And we got to sit with him, and he told us, you know, about connected to, you know, what is this idea of good trouble, you know? And he told us, he was like, you know, I see what young people are doing right now, and I see that it looks different. It's obviously going to look different to the generation that came before us, because it's the same fight, but we're probably just using different tools. And so I think just that pilgrimage in general, I think it was a moment for, the students to really, and like myself also, to really put the pieces together and really understand that history repeats itself, and how do we break that cycle of history repeating itself in this day and age that we are entering, with COVID, but with also like the social justice issues that are happening, we're entering another wave. And as our generation, what are we going to do? Are we going to sit back, kind of wait for it to fall over and kind of wait for it to resolve itself? Or are we going to, get into that idea of good trouble in our own ways? And I think I want to leave you all with this, is that good trouble doesn't look the same for me as it is going to be for you. I think oftentimes we think too much that, okay, in order for me to engage in good trouble or be, civically engaged, I need to march. I need to, yell at the top of my lungs. It doesn't have to look the same for everybody. We always say, like, Annabella always reminds us, make sure you're, engaged in your local elections. Be aware of who is even, not even just your mayor, but who's your alderman. Like, that's something people kind of look beyond, but who's your alderman? Who's running for Senate right now? Who in your local area are, the leaders that you can look up to? And then also it's like, pick your fight. And I say pick your fight in the sense of, for me, I had to like really pick what is that one fight or the one avenue I'm going to take in order to play my role in this whole idea of justice in general, not just this one avenue, as a person of color, but this whole wheel of us trying to see this world a little better. What is my fight and how do I get into that?
Thank you so much, Judy. I definitely am cognizant of time because I know two of our panelists have a stop fairly soon, but I wanted to just end with maybe one word or one phrase from all of you that you want to leave people with, whether it's around good trouble or anti-racism or what we can do. So we'll make it brief and we'll start with Professor Kevin Henze and wrap it up in that way.
It's a challenge. I would challenge all of us to find ways of developing a healthy racial identity, whether that means undoing internalized racism or internalized dominance. I think that's what I most encourage.
I think probably what I would kind of pick up on is the whole thing of we can be so immersed in a whole area of concern, but where can we have influence, and how do we move steadily and with consistency? I know as Sisters of St. Joseph, it's often said we roll up our sleeves and we just keep moving forward. So where do I find that piece of influence that I can really make the difference in the whole area of concern?
I guess the word I would choose is being connected, right? Connecting with one another. Remember that this fight is a humane, let's not forget about humanity and connecting with one another. So I think that's really important. And, listening to other experiences is what kind of pushes us to, right? And pops that bubble. So I think connectedness for sure.
I would say, oh, this is hard because you all said some good things. I would say, don't be afraid of the sound of your voice. Even if at times it might sound like or feel as though your voice is so small, or in these uncomfortable conversations, you might feel as though your voice is not being heard. But continue doing that, because eventually, and you don't know the seed, as Alexa said before, you don't know the seed that you're sowing in someone's mind, or someone's feelings, or someone's, point of reflection. So definitely don't be afraid of the sound of your voice, and let it be heard in any avenue possible.
Thank you so much. I'm just incredibly grateful to all of you, and you just really wrapped up our day so nicely. So thank you for your time, and thank you for your honesty and for sharing your heart with us. Thank you. So Mary Lee, you can guide us to our breakout sessions.
Thank you. Thank you, Annabella, for leading this really powerful discussion. We thank the panelists, Sister Mary, Jetsine, Alexa, Kevin. Incredible insights, incredible wisdom for us to take with us in our heart and our minds around racism, anti-racism, and good trouble. So thank you so very much. So we are now going to go back to our breakout rooms. We will have still a hard stop at 2:45. So I ask the facilitators to perhaps just manage your time accordingly, but we will see everybody back at 2:45 for our closing remarks. Okay, welcome back. And now, with pride and pleasure, I ask President Antoinette Hayes to offer her own remarks. Tony?
Well, all I can tell you, Mary Lou, is this has been an incredible day. And I hope that all of you have found this year's Founders Day to have been both engaging and inspiring. As an institution, we have collectively committed to doing better, both within our Regis community and in our global society. Racism will not end unless we all do our part to make it happen. Look within, be open and willing to change yourselves. Get into good trouble and never let up. It is now my pleasure to return you to Rochelle Mesquia and Dimitri Stewart, who will read aloud Congressman John Lewis's final thoughts before his death in July. Take good care and please always be good to one another, as we are all dear neighbors without distinction. Thank you.
In an op-ed authored shortly before his death on July 17th and published on the day of his funeral by the New York Times, Congressman John Lewis, the Georgia Democrat, reflected upon his own calling to join the civil rights movement following the lynching of Emmett Till, who was murdered in 1955 at 14 years old because he offered to carry the groceries of a white woman.
But Lewis also used his posthumous column to pass the torch of social justice activism onto a new generation of Americans, which of course, all of us. So these are John Lewis's final thoughts and words.
While my time here has now come to an end, I want you to know that in the last days and hours of my life, you inspired me. You filled me with hope about the next chapter of the great American story when you used your power to make a difference in our society. Millions of people, motivated simply by human compassion, laid down the burdens of division. Around the country and the world, you set aside race, class, age, language, and nationality to demand respect for human dignity. That is why I had to visit Black Lives Matter Plaza in Washington, though I was admitted to the hospital the following day. I just had to see and feel it for myself that after many years of silent witness, the truth is still marching on.
Emmett Till was my George Floyd. He was my Rayshard Brooks, Sandra Bland, and Breonna Taylor. He was 14 when he was killed, and I was only 15 years old at the time. I will never ever forget the moment when it became so clear that he could easily have been me. In those days, fear constrained us like an imaginary prison, and troubling thoughts of potential brutality committed for no understandable reason were the bars. Though I was surrounded by two loving parents, plenty of brothers, sisters, and cousins, their love could not protect me from the unholy oppression waiting just outside that family circle. Unchecked, unrestrained violence and government-sanctioned terror had the power to turn a simple stroll to the store for some Skittles or an innocent morning jog down a lonesome country road into a nightmare. If we are to survive as one unified nation, we must discover what so readily takes root in our hearts that could rob Mother Emanuel Church in South Carolina of her brightest and best, shoot unwitting concert-goers in Las Vegas, and choke to death the hopes and dreams of a gifted violinist like Elijah McClain.
Like so many young people today, I was searching for a way out, or some might say a way in. And then I heard the voice of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on an old radio. He was talking about the philosophy and discipline of nonviolence. He said we are all complicit when we tolerate injustice. He He said it is not enough to say it will get better by and by. And he said each of us has a moral obligation to stand up, and speak out. When you see something that is not right, you must say something. You must do something. Democracy is not a state, it's an act. Each generation must do its part to help build what we call the beloved community, a nation and world society at peace with itself. Ordinary people with extraordinary vision can redeem the soul of America by getting in what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. Voting and participating in the democratic process are key. The vote is the most powerful nonviolent change agent you have in a democratic society. You must use it because it is not guaranteed. You can lose it.
You must also study and learn the lessons of history because humanity has been involved in this soul-wrenching existential struggle for a very long time. People on every continent have stood in your shoes through decades and centuries before you. The truth does not change, and that is why the answers worked out long ago can help you find the solutions to the challenges of our time. Continue to build union between movements stretching across the globe because we must put away our willingness to profit from the exploitation of others. Though I may not be here with you, I urge you to answer the highest calling of your heart and stand up for what you truly believe. In my life, I have done all I can to demonstrate that the way of peace, the way of love, and nonviolence is the more excellent way. Now it is your turn to let freedom ring.
When historians pick up their pens to write the story of the 21st century, let them say that it was your generation who laid down the burdens of hate at last, and that peace finally triumphed over violence, aggression, and war.
So I say to you, walk with the wind, brothers and sisters, and let the spirit of peace and the power of everlasting love be your guide.
John Lewis's legacy will live on in our American history and culture. We hope this day has provided the spark and inspiration to get into good trouble, letting, as John Stewart stated, the spirit of peace and the power of everlasting love be your guide, both in your personal lives as well as Regis community members. I thank all who participated today, those who participated in panel discussions, those who facilitated small group discussions, those many community members who helped organize and execute Founders Day 2020. Too many to name, but you know who you are. We are so appreciative of the great turnout today. Thank you so much for opening up your hearts and minds to these important conversations as we continue on our journey and our commitment to do better. So today, I wish you peace and blessings and have a great rest of the day. Thank you.